Reunion of sorts. And I'm Steve Bissette. I was a member of the Pioneer Class of '78. This is Craig Boldman.
Yeah, I was in the second year of the school. So these guys were like, you guys were intimidating to us when we first came, because it seemed like you guys knew what you were doing, but we found out that wasn't the case. But anyway, Dave, you were in my class.
I was in Craig's class, that's right, Dave Dorman. I was in the second year class.
Class of '79.
Class of '79.
Sounds like a movie.
And, we looked up to the first year class in more ways than one, as we were on the first floor, and they were on the second and third floors.
That's right.
So we had to keep our eyes on the sky and make sure that we weren't going to have stuff thrown at us from above.
Well, the upperclassmen, have that privilege. It's sort of, in schools, the upperclassmen get to abuse the underclassmen.
I was more worried about stuff dripping on us.
We believed in trickle-down economics, John. John Totleben, who was also a member of the same class as '79.
I was second year, and I was on the second floor, right underneath the third floor where these guys were. So that's my concern for dripping things. It was, we were guinea pigs. They were the first guinea pigs, but we were the second guinea pigs. But it got better as it went along. So, I think with Dave and Craig, we had a little bit more of an advantage maybe than Steve and Rick and Tom, because Joe was already, figuring out what was working and what wasn't working. So we made out a little better, I think. But it was all good.
Tell us who else was in your class, John?
We had Tom Mandrick, Jane DeWersema, Ron Randall, let's see, Dave Schwartz. He did some stuff for Disney ATV.
Kevin Altieri.
Kevin Altieri.
Went on to do a lot of animation directing.
Including the Batman show.
He's a bigwig out there in animation land in LA.
We haven't had all the introductions yet.
Right, Tom Yeates. Tom Yeates was class of '78, Pioneer class as well. And Rick Veitch, member of the Pioneer class of '78 as well.
We were kind of intimidated by the second year students.
We were afraid of you guys.
When we saw Totleben's work, it was like,
Why are we here?
Yeah, it was a great experience coming from various different parts of the country, and there had never been a comic book school really. And part of Joe's premise was that if you drew comics, you were frowned upon in art school. So this was an opportunity he saw to create a school where they teach you how to draw comics. Fans would come up at conventions, and he realized that there was a big interest. But really, comics weren't really accepted in art school very much. At least in theory, there was a lot of exceptions, but Joe started up his school.
Well, that's why he called it comic book and illustration school.
The cartoon and graphic art. School.
So it wouldn't just be draw comics. It's more than that.
well, we were told in the first year that they thought the comic book industry was on the way out. And Joe himself would say there may not be a comic book business, but there will always be cartoon graphics.
Right.
I don't think we listened to it. We were just comic books. Comic books. And that paid off in the sense that the whole thing rebooted itself. But it was at the end of an era when it was all, from 1937 to 1976, it was all in a state of final collapse of that version of the business.
Yeah, and we were there at an amazing time, because during the time all of us were at the school, we saw the beginning of ElfQuest, the beginning of Cerebus. Dave Sims' Cerebus and Wendy and Richard Peeney's ElfQuest both started in '77, '78.
Creator-owned, Landmark creator-owned properties.
Yeah, Heavy Metal started.
The direct sales market.
The direct sales market.
That's the key to understanding it. It was a whole new way of distributing comic books was born right in that era.
And we had Heroes World in nearby
Yes, that's right.
Morristown, New Jersey.
Right. Well, I think an important thing, I mean, to talk about Joe Kubert, is that he was so into young talent and new ideas and what was happening now. He wasn't just tied into doing his old thing. You know, he was always interested in going to Europe and seeing what was going on there. When I first met Joe Kubert, I had gone to college for a couple of years and was kind of bumming around doing this and that, trying different jobs, working odd jobs. And I had a portfolio of okay drawings, a little bit of continuity stuff. And I was aware of the comic book fandom, and I went to a convention in Berkeley, California. I was living in Sacramento at that time. And at this convention was some fans, including Brent Anderson and Frank Sirocco and a few other folks who ended up becoming professionals. Ken Macklin, maybe Steve Olive. These were all the Northern California comic book artists who were like our age. And they had a room, and they invited some pros that were there to come up to this hotel room and look at portfolios, and Joe was one of them.
Oh, wow.
And that's how I met Joe Kubert. I was at this, I didn't know any of these guys, the other artists, but we were all kind of had this camaraderie at the time. You know, you're about the same age, and you're really into Wrightson, or you're really into Neil Adams, or whatever, and you have your portfolio. And Joe showed up and I didn't remember who else was with him, but I was talking to Brent Anderson about this recently, because he wrote up a little blog on Joe Kubert, and he said that Sergio Aragones was the other artist that was there. And this was probably 75, I'm guessing. In the fall, maybe, or some of the summer, I'm not sure, or maybe 70.
So that was the year before the school
That's
started?
the year before, I'm thinking, yeah. But I can't remember he figured out the dates, but I can't remember what it was. And Joe very carefully went through all the amateur artist portfolios and looked at them, and was nodding, and his wheels were going. You know, he had something in mind at that point. And he took my mailing address. He really liked my work, and I was a big Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. He was doing Tarzan at the time, so we had this kind of Tarzan connection. And he wrote me, like, whatever it was, 6 months, 9 months later or something, and said, I'm going to start this school. If you will come to it, I'll get you into the comic book business. It was sort of like, not even sort of like, it was a bribe. So that's how I found out about all this, and I went out to New Jersey and moved from Northern California to New Jersey, and ended up meeting these characters. And I've been, scratching my head if that was the best thing to do ever since.
Let's share our stories when we first met Joe, since
Right.
you started there. Rick, John, Dave, Craig.
I think most of us met him when he looked at our portfolio. That first meeting, you go down. Joe was a lot younger than I was expecting, because I knew he was a golden age artist, that he'd been around a long time. So I was expecting somebody in his 60s, white-haired kind of thing, but he was early 50s and looked like he wasn't even 40 yet, because he was a real physically, strong guy, and very friendly, very attentive. We sat down, and he, from the heart, told me why he was starting the school, which was that he, as a child, had gone into these art studios where comic books were made in the late 30s and early 40s in New York City. And the artists there had taken the time to teach him the fundamentals of making comic books. And he wanted to recreate that experience in a school situation. And, that was his goal. He wanted to give back. I think he had his own reasons as well, that he also wanted to learn from the next generation. As Tom said, he was always out there, trying to see what was going on, trying to get his finger on the pulse. And I think we were a group that he absorbed in his work as well. But he looked through my portfolio, and I had an underground comic that I had done called Two-Fisted Zombies, and when he saw it, he was just completely tickled. I think that's the word. And I was embarrassed, and I'm going, well, that's not my best word. Underground. But he totally went through it, looked through every bit, and he reached over and pulled out these European albums that he had of Droulier, Moebius, and Pratt. And he said, especially Droulier, he said, have you seen this? And I quickly looked at it, but I couldn't absorb it because I was so scared, reading Joe. But at the end of it, he said to me, I started the school for people just like you. We want you here. The miracle was that I had no money. And so I was applying for this grant to send me to school, but it came time for the school year to begin. The grant couldn't give me an answer one way or another. So I called Joe, and I said, Joe, I don't have the money, I'm not going to be able to make it down. And he said, you know, I've been talking to Muriel about you. Come on down, we'll make it work somehow. So I went to Kubert School with $10 in my pocket. You know, they housed me, they fed me, they schooled me until a couple months later the grant came through and everything was fine. But Joe Kubert was prepared to carry me through that. You know, that's the kind of guidance.
That's a great story. I forgot.
John?
How'd you first?
Yeah,
Well,
what was your
actually, for the second semester, I think it was, he was taking mail-in portfolios. So I had mailed my portfolio in and had an interview with him with a phone. So technically, I guess that's my first meeting with Joe. And I didn't really meet him face to face until I showed up at the school. But he, you know, he was very congenial, and he, you know, had lots of praise to heap on the work that I sent him, probably far more than it deserved at that time. But he, you know, he was always just right there to encourage any student that was really serious. I think one of the points he made to me was that he really wanted to weed out the serious guys from the people who just were maybe, you know, floating around. And I was serious, and, you know, I think he knew that. So, you know, and just like Rick, I didn't have all the money to come up with either. But he made a way for that to happen too, that actually involved a man named Harry Chesler. And actually, it's worth mentioning Harry right now at the beginning, because Harry was the guy that first hired Joe. I think he paid him, what, $5 a week?
To sweep the floor.
Just sweep the studio.
Sweeping the floor of the studio. And
Joe was 11?
he was 11 years old, and he, I think he moved up to erasing pages at some point. But
Which he then could sweep up the eraser.
yes, and he had to sweep up the shade. So, but yeah, I mean, an 11-year-old kid, you know, that just showed up at Harry Chesler's studio in Manhattan, and Harry took him under his wing. And the funny thing is Harry got out of comics sometimes in the early 40s. I think he went into real estate at that time. And Joe hadn't seen him from that point on until he actually was during the first year of the school, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think Muriel ran into him in a framing shop, and Harry happened to see the name Kubert on the package. And he said, "Are you related to Joe Kubert?" And she said, "That's my husband." And he said, "Oh, well," and so he explained to her how he knew Joe, and she took him home and surprised Joe as he was working in his studio. So that began their sort of the second phase of their relationship, which extended to the students, really. It really extended to me a lot, because I ended up working for Harry for 3 years as a result of Joe having worked out something with Harry to get me through school. And I think you worked for him too, didn't you, Craig?
I did, yeah. Harry, back in the 40s, he was a packager of comic books. He would put stories together and market them to different publishing companies. When I applied at the Kubert School, I was a little concerned because the stuff I was interested in was more humor stuff. You know, I've spent most of my career now doing Archie and humor work, and you know, I was well familiar with Joe's work and knew that wasn't what he did. He did, you know, Army.
Adventure, war.
So I didn't know if he would be too interested in what I did, but he, you know, he looked at my portfolio and he had that, you know, he did it, he shook the head. So I was good, and I was really pleased that he took an interest in me. And soon into the year, he hooked me up with Harry Chesler. He said that I didn't know who Harry Chesler was at the time, but he said that Harry Chesler wanted me to draw these cartoon dogs. And he showed me these pictures of like these cartoon, it was a Dalmatian wearing a band uniform.
I remember that.
from some magazine or something from the 1940s. And he says, he wants you to draw pictures of this dog. So I said, okay, and he was paying me for it. I mean, like a very minimal.
But it was
price
pay.
tag. It was pay. And it was, I mean, it was sort of like what Harry did back when Joe was getting started. He was paying me just to work. It
Yeah.
wasn't, I didn't know what he was going to do with these pictures of these dogs that I was drawing.
Do you still know what?
No, he didn't do anything. I mean, the process of drawing it was that was the end product.
Right.
He just wanted me to draw. So, I mean, really, I didn't know that at the time. Looking back, I can see that's what happened. But at the time, I thought, how's he going to use these dogs? How's he going to use these stupid dogs?
I remember paintings of dogs in his house, right? Didn't he have a lot of?
Well, the
paintings of
mansion
dogs?
had paintings of those dogs. Remember, you'd go into the mansion, the Baker
Yeah.
Mansion is where the classes were, now it's the dorm at the school, but we'd go in and there was the painting of Harry Chesler as you
Yeah.
walked in
Yeah.
the front hall. And then there were these bizarre 1940s style paintings, like from vodka ads and so on, of like cartoon dogs. They weren't playing poker yet, but they were like terriers and, do you remember those?
Yeah, I do.
And they were on the staircase as you went up.
Right.
And this was Harry's art collection, I think, that was hanging in the school.
Yeah.
Joe had some pieces from
Yes.
his collection.
Right.
But Harry had these strange,
Okay, yeah.
do you remember that?
Yes, I do, yeah.
You have to pass it every day on the way to
Right.
class, so.
Sure.
Did Harry find the Baker Mansion?
I think Harry found the mansion, correct? Yeah.
Oh, then they must have bumped into each other before the school actually
That's
started.
the John's story with Muriel.
Right.
And Harry sort of was the godfather of the school.
Yes.
And Harry's a hard character to describe. I mean, maybe John and Craig can describe him.
Oh, yeah.
He was always in the three-piece suit, wasn't he?
Always dressed, snappy dresser.
He always dressed every day. He had a three-piece suit on.
The vest,
he
you
looked
know,
like
yeah.
he walked out of the 1920s or 30s.
Yeah.
He had his vest, a tie, a white shirt, and the suit.
Chin up.
Except in the summertime, he would take the suit coat off. He still had the vest on,
Yeah.
and he'd roll the sleeves up and he'd tie them with the old armbands. But he was really old-fashioned, from that old era.
And he wasn't gruff, but he seemed a little brusque. But he would I remember him smacking his lips when he'd be looking at your guys, like, now what you're going to do now is, I can remember a phrase like
You
that.
don't know nothing. I'm gonna tell you.
Yeah, you don't know nothing because I'm going to tell you.
He was a character. I mean, I was with him.
quite a character.
He took me to a restaurant one time, right? And it was that little diner that he always liked to go to
Yeah.
for breakfast and stuff. So this was more of a dinner time thing. But we sit down and whatever I ordered, it came with a salad, right? So I get this salad and the waiter sets it on the table and Harry looks at it and says, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "Well, it's a salad." And he's like, "That's not lettuce. That's chicory. Rabbits don't even eat that shit." He made the waiter take the salad away and bring it back with lettuce. But that's what he was like.
Yeah, we used to get to go to his house. He didn't live that far away, and he had all these paintings on the walls, old pole art and stuff. He's a really interesting guy. Yeah.
And then later, it turned out a lot of them were forgeries,
Some of
right?
them were
I mean,
Well,
they had been recreated by other generations of cartoonists. He had subsidized the way he was subsidizing you guys.
I
That
was probably
is,
doing forgeries.
you were doing forgeries.
George Rosen shadow paintings.
Well,
that weren't
yeah,
by George Rosen.
the bank claimed they were forgeries, but I suspected there was some shenanigans
Ooh.
going on. And I said so to Joe too, and he said, "I think so too."
Oh, really? Oh, so that was during the estate auction, and they were
When that
claiming.
estate, I don't know if you were there. You were there, Tom, when they had, it was a little while after Harry had died, there was that thing up at Fairleigh Dickinson where it was a Remember Harry Chesler thing.
Mhm, I remember the university
So-
there got a lot of his
Yeah,
collection.
Joe and Muriel were there, and Jack Binder was there, and Dr. Fraser, who ran the art department up there,
Right.
and a bunch of other people, but I don't remember if Steranko was there or not, but
Maybe. That
there were
sounds
a lot of
familiar.
people, yeah, remember that thing? But
Yeah, it was a big thing there.
I think that's when I might have mentioned something to Joe about.
Okay, so they may have been claiming they were
Later,
forgeries
it was a
just
year later
because.
After Harry died.
Yeah. Dave, how did you meet Joe? we should complete our meeting stories and then,
My situation was fairly similar to John's in that it was a mail-in portfolio review, or at least the first step of a review. And I got a positive response back from that, and he wanted me to come up for a personal interview. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, so it was just a 5-hour drive up to New Jersey to the, and since I was living on the gracious monetary benefits of my folks, my mother wanted to come up and see the school and make sure it was going to be a good place for me. My mother and I drove up to New Jersey to have an interview, and we had expected to, drive up, stay overnight somewhere in Jersey, and then drive back. But we had left early in the morning, and it was just a 5-hour drive. We got there around 12 or 1, and Joe took me in immediately. Had my portfolio with me. This was during a period when I was very interested in continuing my artistic education and moving into comics, but I had just started to paint within the prior year or year and a half, so I was still dabbling with painting in conjunction with the line drawing. And so my portfolio was probably about half painted work and half line work at the time that I had the interview. And so we talked for about an hour in his office, and I obviously, like everybody here, knew Joe on a professional basis and knew what type of work he did and the quality of the work and his stature in the industry. So I was a little hesitant, being that close to someone who was a grand old man in the business and still being very young at the time. So I sat there very quietly as he went through my artwork, and then we talked a little bit about what I wanted to do as an artist, and I said I really wanted to do comics. That's how I learned to draw, and it's something that I learned to read with comics, and I want to make my mark. I want to contribute and do that, and I knew, looking back later, that he knew I wasn't quite right in saying that, because he...
you didn't mean that the way you just
No,
said it, Dave.
that's true. The words didn't come out exactly.
He's not quite right.
That he knew that, I think he saw that the direction that I wanted to go really wasn't comics, that it was illustration, but he didn't want to dissuade me. I think he saw that the school could give me something more than I could find anywhere else, as far as the basics in building illustration, not necessarily just comic work, but to give me a firmer foundation so that when I was ready to move into color work and painting, that I would be better suited for it. At the time that we're talking about here in the school, the first 2 years, and I think for a couple of years after that, there was pretty much no color curriculum at all. There was a little bit of comic style coloring offered, I think, in one class, but there was no painting courses. There was no real in-depth color work. So what I was there to learn was comic book illustration. And as it turned out, at the end of the first year, my only year at the school, Joe and I sat down again, and he said to me directly that the school has nothing more to offer me, and that he saw that I really wanted to paint and encouraged me to go in that direction. And that's the direction that I followed into my career and led me to where I am now. He is a very astute, was a very astute teacher of students. He could see where the students' strengths were, where their weaknesses were, and really helped focus the student to go in the direction that I think that the student really wanted to go, really wanted to learn, and that is the greatest thing that the school and Joe gave to me, was putting me on the right path.
And Craig, you came in, I mean, we had fellow, I'll call it Bigfoot cartooning for want of a better word. I mean, in our class we had Ernie Passon and Rick Grimes. Although Rick Grimes is hard to fit into any category. But Joe, I mean, you already had folks who were in our class that were working in the humor style. That's what they wanted to do.
Well, Hi Eisman was a teacher.
Hi Eisman was our
and,
teacher. Yeah.
uh,
And Hi Eisman was doing Little Iodine at the time. He's doing Popeye now. And another
Newspaper
strip.
strip artist.
Yeah.
He was a teacher.
And
Might still be
Henry
teaching.
Boltman, too.
Henry Bolton.
Henry Boltanoff. Oh my God. But you talked about meeting Joe. We should cover that. What was your first?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
You got the nod, I remember.
Yeah, I just made the appointment, came and showed my portfolio. It's not, there's no amazing story there, but he, I passed. But, looking back and looking at the people at this table, what sort of really impresses me is that the eye that he did have, that the school was a brand new experiment. From the first year, hit the ground running. I mean, people at this table have stayed, made the mark and stayed in the industry all these years, and as evidenced by the fact that you're the star attractions here at the convention this weekend. He must have been able to see something correctly in the people that he looked at. I think that's really impressive, that how many of the people in those early years
Oh, yeah.
have gone on to make real careers.
But Joe also, it was beyond just the professional, it's also Jan Dursma, when the week that Joe passed away, posted a photo from Jan and Tom's wedding. And Jan Dursma and Tom Mandrake met at the school. They were, students in your guys' class. And Jan posted a photo of their wedding, which took place on the grounds of the school. And there's this great photo that Jan put up of Jan and Tom are kissing after the vows, and Joe is slightly out of focus in the background, and there's that body language with his arms crossed, and he approves, It's like Odin approves,
Odin.
So there was this personal link that Joe really.
Now their daughter goes to the school as well.
She graduated from.
She graduated.
Yeah, she
So it's
graduated.
intergenerational at this point.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody had swashbuckler costumes on.
That's right.
And it
I
run
had
around
one
the
of those.
death where I mean it.
Yeah, you must have been at the wedding, so.
I remember I have some photos of that Ron Randall in the big sleeve shirt. and under the trees outside the mansion, yeah.
The way I met Joe, I've talked about online the week Joe died, is, my dad was a military man. My dad went through 4 branches of the service: Navy, Coast Guard, U.S. Army, National Guard. My dad never believed in cartooning as either a thing that you can make a living at or a manly thing to do. So that was my 22-year battle with my dad all my life. And my dad decided, I had heard about the school through a column in the Buyer's Guide when it was still a newspaper, called Beautiful Balloons. I think Shel Dorf's column. Don and Maggie's column. Right, thank you, Bruce. And it was the first announcement of the school, and one of my classmates I was going to an art college in Northern Vermont, Johnson State College, a completely useless art education I was getting there. And I was ending up doing technical theater. And one of my friends who wanted to write comics and was the first comic fan I ever met, gave me that column and said, "You're wasting your time at Johnson, you have to go here." And the head of the Johnson Art Department, when I told him I was not planning on staying into a 3rd year, said, "You're a fool, you're a country boy, this school is outside of New York, they're gonna eat you like a shark there, you have no idea where you're getting into." And I still sent in my application. I had done a comic while I was at Johnson called Abyss, ABYSS. And we had, hopefully sent out copies to Warren Publications in DC. And I still remember the letter from Warren that just said, your comic is aptly named. So, I didn't have any, I was like Rick and everyone else there, I had the desire to do comics, but I didn't think I had a hope in hell of, getting to it. And I sent Abyss, and I didn't have a portfolio. I mean, the stuff we had done in college was useless. My portfolio was that issue of Abyss, and Muriel called me and said, can you come down for an interview? Joe would like to meet you. And my dad decided he was gonna go. And we drove down, we saw this horrific car accident in the middle of Dover, New Jersey, on the main drive, 46, what's the drive?
46.
Yeah, 46.
Route 46.
And we got up to the mansion, and the minute my dad met Joe Kubert, my life changed for the better. Joe was a man's man, and suddenly, and my dad, if you had been in the military, you were more than okay, and Joe had served in the military. And the minute my dad shook Joe's hand, suddenly everything I'd wanted to do all my life was okay, And the more he and Joe talked, he was like, can he really make a living at this? And Joe goes, I've got 5 kids. It's like everything at that minute changed. And it was Joe, Joe was such a powerful presence.
Yeah.
He was so open and honest and candid. There was no BS about Joe,
Yeah.
and you
Very
felt that
nice.
from the first second. And that changed my life. Suddenly, it was not only that I was going to get to go, it was that I had just enough money to go the first year, and my dad paid for the second year, and that was because of Joe, that just changed everything. Let's talk a little bit about the faculty. I mean, we mentioned High Eisman. High Eisman was one of our favorite teachers.
Yeah.
But favorite faculty stories, Rick? I guess if we each put one out there, we'll have an entertaining.
Gee, I don't know which would be the favorite.
Where do you start?
I know that I really liked Rick Estrada's class because as much as he was teaching us to draw and to construct stories, it was also like he was pumping us up, making us believe that we actually could, do this job. And that really was something I needed. There was some part of me didn't believe that I could do it or that I was worthy of it. And those pep talks he gave, really spoke to me. And I kind of bonded with him, even though, the material I was doing, kind of enraged him.
Yeah,
because he was very straight and religious where, I gave him my underground comics and, these became lessons in the class, as a reply to the material.
Robert Crumb is a very, very sick man. That's how we started that
A
lecture.
very, very sick man. Yeah, I remember that.
We ended up good friends, and he actually, invited me into his home, and I had dinner with him and his family, and he was just an amazing guy. So, I mean, all the instructors were really good. Some of them were really great.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think Estrada was the one that pushed the button I needed to have pushed.
Yeah, we had Rick Estrada, Lee Elias, Dick Giordano, Kelly Harris, High Eisman, Henry Bolton. If it gets to me, no one has given a Henry Boltnoff story. I've got one, but Henry Boltnoff was our humor professor.
I didn't have Henry.
No, well, he was gone before you guys came in.
I was there, he taught lettering.
Oh, no, I remember he was there because I.
He taught lettering? High Eisman was our lettering.
That's weird.
We had lettering.
Who was that, the kind of a, criminal who escaped from Derby, PA? What was that guy's name?
A criminal?
Tom McVeigh.
Tom McVeigh, oh,
Tom
yes,
McVeigh
yeah.
butting heads with Henry Bolton. Boy, those guys were from 2 different planets. It was hopeless. Yeah, so Tom McVeigh was in the next class. Was in your class. So Bolton was still there. Well, let's see. The teachers were, Rick Estrada was great. Like Rick says, he was real good at the pep talk. He was very worldly. He was from Cuba. He was there when the battles and the revolution were happening a little bit, and he talks about having to duck down and bullets going through the windows of the store he was in or his home or something. And he had all these great stories. His uncle was Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway got him something like that, right? Got him a visa or something to come up to the States, and he did one story for EC, and then he ended up a playboy in Europe, traveling around, living the high life, and then he saw God. He got
Devout
saved,
Mormon.
became a devout Mormon. But unlike a lot of the kind of the devout religious people, he had a really interesting, colorful life before that. So he brought all this experience to his teaching, and one of the guys who I really dug was Lee Elias. He had an art style that was different than he was doing adventure stuff, but it was different. He was from the Frank Robbins sort of.
Frank Robbins, Milton Caniff
Milton
School.
Caniff
Yeah.
School.
And he had actually ghosted, or he tried out for ghosting on Steve Canyon, I think was the strip.
He had a strip that he did even, I think, for
Beyond Mars.
Beyond Mars.
Beyond
It was
Mars
real
in the
interesting.
50s, yeah.
And he showed us all these weird special effects he would do, like inking with a hair comb, and to get lines.
Yeah,
wave
using
lines.
rubber cement.
Rubber cement.
to
And he
create
used a lot of
textures.
white paint in his stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, he was this crusty, classic New York cartoonist guy.
Virtuoso violin player.
He was a virtuoso.
And he was
violin player.
obsessed with Edgar Casey.
He was a
Remember he
hypnotist.
would talk about Edgar
He
Casey?
was a hypnotist.
Yeah,
He would
right,
have hypnotizing sessions.
Huh.
He hypnotized me one time.
He hypnotized you?
Yeah.
Oh, let's hear this story.
Well, it wasn't like full hypnosis, but it was a thing where, I was saying, you're not going to be able to do anything with me. And he said, okay. And he stood around behind me, and he just said, you're going to fall backwards then. And I said, I'm not going to fall backwards. He says, I'm going to be right here to catch you, and you're going to fall backwards. You're going to fall backwards into my hands. You're just going to fall backwards. And I went,
Yeah, these guys were interesting. A lot of them had never done teaching and weren't really up on how to set up a curriculum and to convey the information, but they had the information. They had all these years of experience, and they were very interesting. And to, like Steve, a country bumpkin, or me from suburban Northern California, going to, the East Coast, it was into outside New York was quite an experience. And these were not like any of the adults that I knew that were my friends' parents, at all. And it was great. It was really, I just ate it all up, Lee Elias was really, really great, and I liked Dick Giordano. I really connected well with Dick. Dick and I had a really good rapport. He liked me.
I didn't have Lee Elias or Dick Giordano.
Yeah, they
No,
were both
they were
only the first
gone.
year.
You guys had Tex Blaisdell.
Yeah, Tex Blaisdell, we had Dick
Ralph
Ayers.
Reese.
Dick Ayers, Ralph Reese.
I didn't realize that was our first
For a
year.
while, yeah.
And,
Robert Kennedy.
You guys had Robert Kaniger. How many of you know Robert Kaniger? Robert
those
Kaniger, the
were
writer.
some fun
Yeah,
classes.
those are.
Well, Tex Blaisdell was probably the real character in our
Yeah.
class.
But yeah, the thing, these guys were not trained instructors.
Right.
And
No.
my experience a lot of times was, they had this knowledge, but didn't necessarily know how to get it.
How did
out
you
to
coax
you.
it out?
Yeah, it was up to the
There
students
would
to
be like
get it
this-
out of
this-
them.
I'd be working on something or other, and Joe would come around and he'd say, no, that's all wrong. He'd take the tracing paper, throw it on there, whip out this Joe Kubert masterpiece, and he'd say, that's how you do it. And then he'd leave and
That's it. That's exactly what it was like. Yeah.
But, one of the best things I got from the experience was just sort of being surrounded by like-minded people and sort of picking up that energy.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I learned as much from the other students as from the instructors.
We were all on the quest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all
Rick,
trying to find it.
Rick Estrada taught me one thing that I've kept in my head for almost 40 years now. We were in a class, and he was showing us how to lay out a page, and it was a war page, and there was an army on one side with the commander sitting on a horse, and there was the cannons on the other side with the army pointing the cannons across the page. And he said, how do you tell the story? So he went up there and he laid out a page and said, no, this is not the right way to do it. Okay, what's gone wrong here? And we'd raise our hands. We couldn't figure out what was going wrong. So he got up, ripped the page off, and started a new page. Small panel, really large panel. Turned to us and said, always shoot for major effect. So we had the cannon shooting at the guy on the horse exploding.
Right.
And that phrase has stuck with me because I'm an illustrator. I'm looking for that one image that will tell the story.
Right.
And so from the minute he said that, it has stuck in my head my whole career.
Yeah.
Always shoot for major effect.
Yeah.
Make the page,
Right.
tell the story. Don't hide it. You don't have to be subtle. tell the story on that page,
Right.
and then move on.
Yeah.
And, it's those little things that, make the time that you spend very worthwhile.
And there's one more little thing about Rick Estrada. He was born left-handed, but raised Catholic in the Latin American country, Cuba, where you weren't supposed to be left-handed. That was like
Yeah,
devil
he was
or something.
forced to
So he
use-
was forced to learn to write and draw with his right hand, but really it was his left. So he was ambidextrous, and he would stand up in front of the class with a pencil in both hands, and he would draw like this with both hands. And here's your green students trying to figure out which end of the pencil. There's this guy drawing with both hands. It was, like I said, it was,
Draw independently.
yeah, independently, yeah.
Craig, what you were saying about it was hard to coax the information out of them. Some of my fondest memories, Erwin Hazen was also one of our
Yeah,
instructors
Erwin
in the
was
school.
great, yeah.
Because Erwin
He came in
knew
the
the
second
stuff, he was, he'd done Dondi, the comic strip, but it was hard
He's
to
a
coax.
Bigfoot guy, yeah.
Yeah,
But he
it
did
was
do
hard
some
to
of the other
coax
stuff
out of
too,
him
yeah.
what was there. And part of what your class dealt with it, because I remember things like OD Duck, which was overdose duck, OD Duck. I think it was, OD Flowers, ODB. OD Flowers, OD Bees, OD Birdies in the trees, OD Smell, and OD Smell of OD Duck. Anyway, but part of the clash that we faced in the mid-70s, we had National Lampoon, right? National Lampoon was still big, and it was beginning to die when we were at the school, go downhill. I remember the clashes between faculty as being really fascinating, because we'd watched these things closely. Joe brought in Mike Kaluta as a guest speaker one time. And Tom asked Mike about Carson Venus as backups, and Mike sort of hems and haws, because Tom's like, well, you only did a couple, and I really love those, I wish you'd done more, and Mike kind of hems and haws, and Joe makes a comment like, well, Mike couldn't keep up on the deadlines.
Well,
And Mike goes, well, I couldn't live on Filipino page reads, and suddenly, I'm just using it as an example of like,
Yeah, I
you got this
remember that
little
well.
snapshot,
Yeah.
of like, whoa. Or, we had been trained that, brushes, you clean your brush and take care of your brush until you needed to replace it. And we bought our art supplies from Muriel in the office. And Will Eisner shows up, and he's got this stub behind his ear. It's this thing that looks like a block of black with some wood on the end of it behind his ear. And I think it was Kara Sherman in our class who asked Will, like, how often do you replace the brush? And Will pulls this thing out from behind his ear, and he goes, oh, I'm still using this brush. Like here's Will Eisner, the other grand old man of comics, completely contradicting what Joe had told us the week
It was
before.
like 1938 or something.
Yes.
He'd been using the brush for centuries, exactly. But the big one I remember was, and this happened in our class, and it may be why Henry Boltnoff was not teaching humor. We got an assignment in our class from Henry Boltnoff. Henry Boltnoff was an old school Bigfoot cartoonist. He used to do the Caps hobby hints in the DC comics about how to, build model kits, and he had a couple of humor strips. DC always ran a half page. Super Turtle, thank you, Craig. And there was some little boy that was a character.
Casey the cop, he did.
Yeah, Casey.
He did.
And he was of that school of cartooning where the cartooning was amusing, but the jokes were never funny. They were it was Milton Berle time, And Henry would come in and he gave us an assignment where he gave us the gags. He was so frustrated with us as a group that he said, no, I'm giving you these gags and just draw the gag. And he gave us like 3 of the oldest single panel cartooning gags you can imagine. I remember there was a camel and an oasis was one of the gags. And the gags weren't funny. We were just like, I guess we just draw these. And that was Henry's lesson. We were drawing them as if we were going to sell them to a gag magazine.
Yeah.
The following week, there was a snowstorm, and Henry couldn't make it in on the train. So
Oh, so
Joe took
taught
over
his
the
class
class.
that day, yes.
And Joe says, okay, what was the assignment Henry gave you? And we said, well, we have to draw these gags. And Joe said, okay, let's, and he never used the word crit. He would say, let's look at them, So Joe starts putting them up.
You can say that.
And he goes, well, this is a good drawing, but this gag isn't funny. And we all started looking at each other, and we were like, well, Henry told us to just... So Joe says, okay, let me look at the next one. He put the next one up, and it was the same gag, because that's what we've been told to do. And Joe, when he did this, you knew He would like inhale. None of us can any of us imitate the Joe? Yeah, there you go. It was like you knew
Sigh,
something.
inhale.
And Joe turns to us all and he goes, I don't need to see anymore. You all misunderstood the assignment. We're looking at each other like, no, we understood it perfectly. He says, you're supposed to take the gag and make it funny. So he reassigned, we were to take the raw material, and he reassigned the assignment. Go back, rework these cartoons, but rework the gags, make them funny. And the next week, when they're done, Henry comes in, right? And the first gag that went up was our classmate Ernie Passman. And he had the guy crawling through the desert getting to the oasis, and the camel is shitting into the water of the oasis. And Henry was struck speechless. He turned red. Do you remember that? He didn't know. This was a major curveball into Henry Boltnoff's skull. But it was funny. But we were. And Ernie's gags kept going up. And Ernie was a very funny cartoonist. He was a very crude cartoonist in terms of his line work, but he was funny.
He had a real sharp wit.
Well, and then Henry made the mistake of he goes, no, you completely misunderstood the assignment. Henry made the mistake of putting Rick Grimes' gag up next. And I don't even remember what the drawing was, but Henry went apoplectic at that point. And that was our first blowout of a teacher, Craig. Henry wasn't teaching humor much after that class.
Henry got fired, but Joe actually fired Henry. I remember that. It was kind of sad because I kind of liked Henry because
we all liked him.
Yeah, he's just to me, they're all such interesting, different characters that I could just look at him and go, look at this guy, he's an interesting guy. His trip is not my trip.
No.
It was so old-fashioned, so stuck in 1940, not even 1949.
Yeah, and I don't mean to attack Henry. What I really want to make the point is, this is how Joe worked. I mean, Joe was thinking like we were. And
Henry was out of there. Eventually,
he was like, I don't want you learning how to sell stuff to the 1950s gag publications. They don't exist anymore.
Right,
you know?
And Boltnoff was probably an old friend. Like a lot of those guys were old acquaintances and friends, and he had to say, this isn't.
But that's my teacher story. We all have.
I remember that.
Memories of that stuff, but I remember that class vividly.
Yeah.
Vividly.
Joe was also, but I wanted to reiterate some of the things
and then
like
Rick's
Craig was
gonna
saying, is that Joe really wanted students that were into it, that really wanted to get there. You had to really, really want it. That was more important to him than your talent, really. You had to have drive. You had to just almost like be obsessed by this stuff.
Can I make an observation real quick? It just didn't occur to me until earlier this afternoon, in looking at this panel. The comics industry is primarily made up and moves ahead through superhero books. That's 90% of what is familiar and what is being done. And yet you look at this panel and you say, where's the superhero artist? And you look at it, well, sort of.
Satire.
Yeah, exactly. And it didn't occur to me to thinking about this that Joe set up the school not really to expand the superhero comics, but to teach students how to draw continuous panel stories.
Oh yeah.
It didn't matter.
Genre had nothing to do with it.
What the genre is, but in looking back at all of the people that I knew from the school, and the people sitting on this panel here, very few of them do superhero books. Most are in other genres other than that. And I think that just goes to show the eye that Joe had in not looking for a stereotype, but looking for the talent.
Right.
And the desire.
The desire. You've got to want it, yeah.
Something we might want to talk about is the extensive work study program.
The work study program.
That Joe and Muriel put together, because it kind of really shows their character, how devoted they were to the students. Probably the first couple months we arrived, Joe arranged for this Taste of the Mechanicals job for an educational publisher, where we were taking existing Silver Age panels from DC Comics relettering them and then pasting them up into new
Oh,
books.
yeah.
And,
Yeah, and they were all grammatically correct, and they were done as a reading manual of
right?
some kind.
Lettering, yeah.
and this is a job every student could be involved in as long as they were up on their studies.
Yeah.
And it would happen after school into the evenings. And usually Joe was there
Yeah.
late into the night, doing this stuff.
Supervising and doing it,
Supervising it.
yeah.
And there were catalogs, there were advertisements. We did a giant mural for the superhero store.
We did those paperbacks, where
Yeah.
we reformatted all the DC Silver Age comics again and reformatted them for the Signet paperback size. That was one of our first gigs, too.
So this not only, brought us a little money, which, we were starving students, which was great, but it also gave us this hands-on work, on real projects that we're gonna go through the pipeline and become things.
Yeah.
And it was just extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a real experience. He had the catalogs. We did the superhero catalog. Somebody had one to get autographed. That we all worked on. Joe Kubert.
I think everyone on this
me,
panel,
yeah,
yeah,
we all
got put to
stayed
that
up late,
meeting.
and these would be deadline jobs under pressure. You're staying up late. You're drinking coffee,
And when Joe's
trying
saying
to
to-
hammer something out.
And
with
when
your
Joe's saying to you
minimal
that Spider-Man flashlight isn't dynamic enough, Spider-Man flashlight, and it's,
Yeah, you had to be able to deliver, and that's one of the things about the comic book industry. You got to be able to deliver the goods on some level. It's got to be dynamic. It's got to be exciting. It's got to be alive. Whether it's drawn accurately or is better, but it's really got to have that energy. And Joe Kubert was just such a dynamo. He brought that to the stuff that we got to do, and we got to do backups in Sergeant Rock the second year.
Yeah.
I think it was. We started. You guys did the first one, the Saigon Sally.
Rick and I.
At the end of the first year, I
You
think.
got the second one, didn't you?
And I did the preacher right after.
That's right, that's right. And you were doing the
I did
humor
gag
pages,
pages,
the
yeah.
gag pages, these were all stories that we were paid for that appeared in Sergeant Rock. So we were getting our first mainstream comics experience.
He wouldn't let us get credit. He wouldn't let us put our names on it, and he said, "You'll thank me later."
Yeah, the early ones would just say the Joe Kubert school.
They didn't say anything, I don't think. They don't think they were credit. It said story by Steve Kelly or whatever. What was that?
Well, Val Eads,
Yeah.
I think it was Archie Goodwin, did Song for Saigon Sally.
Oh,
We did
really?
some Bob Kanigher scripts.
Oh yeah. It might have story
yeah.
credit, but in the art, maybe it says some of them.
I think it was the
eventually say
Kubert school and some of them.
Yeah.
I know the first
When
jobs
Jan
I
and
did
Tom were
for,
doing them, maybe. Mine, I don't think had any credit.
and you signed yours, Boldman.
Did I?
Or I just knew your work so well that I recognized it when
If
I
I
saw
did,
it.
nobody
Yeah.
told me not to.
Okay. And battle albums, a bunch of us did battle albums.
Sure. And after we got out of the school and we were having a hard time getting work, he would still throw us bones. This was the Harry
Telegraphics
Chesler.
studio, yeah. And in
Yeah.
John's case, John actually, you did the Ruby ad of Omar Khayyam, not once, not twice, but.
What started it off was Dave had made the point earlier that the school hadn't gotten to the point where they were teaching anything to do with color,
Right.
or painting, or any of that. And I was ready for a lot of that. I had done plenty of painting previously in high school, but Joe's solution for filling that need for me was to send me to Harry Chesler. And Harry, the first thing he had me doing was these strange little, I guess they were like moments of history pieces. They were like one panel things of something to do with Napoleon or so. I've still got those things. I mean, they're just pencil, and he'd have them lettered. But they were just these weird things that I wasn't really into, but I'm thinking, oh shit, I gotta sit here and draw this stuff. And then he started breaking out the Omar Khayyam thing. Now apparently he had, you remember that artist Raphael Astorita?
Astorita, they talked about him a lot, yeah.
Okay, Astorita was some guy that worked in Harry's
He was on
studios.
dry brush, really nice dry brush
Way back
technique.
when, yeah, he was a pretty good artist, but he was one of those guys that kind of fell between the cracks and you really don't hear about him. He had a pretty good dry brush style and he could color, he had a good watercolor over line art style. But Harry had him doing a couple of things from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam years before, probably when he was working in the studios. But anyway, he had pulled out a few of these old Astorita drawings and says, I want to do the whole Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. It's like 101 verses, you know, that he wanted illustrated. And we ended up doing it, and most of it was in full color. But that's how I started with Harry, was that, you know, Joe saw that I needed to branch out into the painting and coloring and, you know, sent me in that direction.
Financial as well.
And it was, yeah, there was the financial thing
Yeah,
too.
you didn't stay for second, you stayed in Dover, but you didn't stay for second year.
I didn't stay for the second year.
You
but
moved
I
in
did-
with us.
Yeah, we all
That's
moved
right,
in, and
that's
I
right.
worked for Harry, and you guys were picking up gigs.
Yeah.
So,
And but you ended up doing like at least two, sometimes three versions of those illustrations.
You would do them over and over, he'd make you do them over.
Yeah.
Certain ones, yeah, or, you know, certain ones had to be redone or, you know, reworked anyway.
Reworked, yeah.
But it was a lot of work.
A lot of this stuff that, like we were talking about, the superhero catalog and everything, Joe was there with us at 2
Yeah.
in the morning, ramrodding this thing.
Well, actually, the thing we haven't said that we should explain is the first year, and was his studio still there the second year when you guys came
Yeah,
in?
it was. Yeah.
Joe's studio was actually in the Baker Mansion, where you got on the main floor. The Baker Mansion was this huge palatial, late 19th century, you know, oak,
Three-story,
woodwork, just
yeah,
beautiful,
like a plantation
beautiful place.
house with pillars and, you know,
Yeah.
it looked like Dr. X's from the X-Men's, you know.
Yeah, it did look
Dr.
like
Xavier. It was like
Professor Xavier's.
It was that the circular driveway and
There was a
grounds.
swimming pool.
Yeah, with big trees and grounds.
Huge trees,
These
and
climate
Joe's
trees.
studio was on the main floor as you walked in. It was on the right as you came in the door. And especially the first year, I mean, Joe would tolerate us going in and watching him as long as we didn't bother him. Or, I remember the night that we got to watch Joe ink like he inked 5 covers. We lasted for 2 of them because he'd work till 2, 3 in the morning and then drive them into New York the next morning. But he would play classical music on the radio and FM.
Light jazz.
Light jazz, right. But there was one night where we got to sit, and Tom, you were looking at the Prince Valiant Sundays. He let you pull those out of he had those huge drawers, and he had all
Great
those.
old-
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, he had his
And,
old roofs. He had
and we
black
got
and
to
white
watch
roofs.
Joe work. So when Rick says that Joe was supervising him, his studio was right there. So he would like come in, we were the sweatshop when we were working on the
Right
catalogs.
off before you went into the office.
Yep, yep. And when we were working, he was laying tracing paper, doing the Kubert thing of bang, bang, bang. No, that flashlight's not dynamic. Here's how you make a Spider-Man flashlight dynamic. And you'd go, yeah. And then you could never draw like Joe. But
You could always walk in there with it if you had a problem.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
You would sit down and go, you know, you're losing the drawing right here. And,
Yep.
where's this?
We began assisting him on commercial projects too. Sparky the Fire Dog.
You did a lot of that. You did the 4-color press. You and I.
You and I laid out Sparky and the
That's
Fire
right.
Dog. And we did the 4-color press one, and, you know, it was like being able to assist Joe.
Yeah.
It was just astounding learning.
Well, it was also like with the 4-color one. I remember you penciled a lot of the pages, and then Joe would ink them. So you're seeing Joe's inks on your pencils, and that alone was like,
He
whoa.
would do it with the people, but I would do like the printing
The
press
machines
from
and the presses.
photos.
Yeah, yeah.
You remember the time he came out, it was like 3 in the morning, we were doing you and I were the only ones there, and he looked at us, and he went, heh. And he picked you and I up, one in each arm,
You picked us up like rag
tossed us
dolls.
against the wall.
You remember the football
We
game?
knew we were okay then, I guess. Yeah.
Do you guys remember the football game?
Yeah, those are
There was a
dangerous.
football game in the yard, first year, Joe versus our entire class. Joe won.
Joe won, yeah.
I mean, this is a very unusual guy.
Now-
Now, he also, I wanted to, since you guys are talking about these things you did, as an observer to this myself, what was going on, Joe was just tickled, to use Rick's term, by Rick and Steve. He just thought these guys were a kick. He just loved their underground, you know, sarcastic, irreverent humor, the way they would, you know, respond to these really kind of boring straight assignments, you know, with this real cutting, you know, like the camel, you know, crabbing in the oasis kind of stuff. Joe just loved that stuff. He thought it was hilarious. And I saw Joe's work reflecting, particularly Bissette's style. Now, it could have been that Joe had that style in him, and I just had never seen it. But he would draw monsters, these big-eyed, weird, you know, dripping, you know, covered with pustules, you know, creatures, like Steve loves to do. And Joe started drawing them too, and he would get this maniacal giddy thing and start chuckling to himself, like Steve does, you know. But he'd do this stuff. I mean, there was a real symbiosis between particularly these guys and Joe, which goes to show what kind of guy Joe was. He wasn't threatened by this or
Oh,
anything.
no, he found it all very...
Yeah, he was just like a Joe team, you know, great.
One of the reasons I think he started the school was to inhale what this next generation
Yeah,
was.
I think so too.
Humor was changing, fantasy was
Yeah,
changing.
yeah.
It was a big cultural thing afoot at that time. There was Star Wars, there was National Lampoon,
Heavy metal.
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, yeah.
The whole thing that he had built his life on was changing. I think he wanted to understand it.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid of it, he didn't resent it. He wanted
He embraced
to
yeah,
embrace it.
Yeah, and like Rick mentioned him pulling out the European stuff, Juliet, Mobius and stuff. He did that to our class. And we're looking to get into this medium that's printed really poorly on a really crappy paper.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do. And he pulls out these hardback, gorgeous volumes printed on some state-of-the-art printing system that nobody in the States knew about. And he claimed that the European, or somewhere we got this story that the European publishing industry got bombed in World War II, so they had all these new presses that were really great, whereas we had these crappy old ones in the States. And this was like, we couldn't believe this, fully painted, wild fantasy pantomime stuff that, by Mobius, Arzak. You guys familiar with Arzak? This is where we first saw this stuff, was Joe showing it to us. This,
And I had that set of Mattel
sky's the limit,
Herland.
guys.
I had that set of Mattel Herland that
you already had Steve.
that I had purchased while I was at
ahead of the
Johnson.
game. Yeah, Steve
So-
would have been ahead of the game. But he's going, this is your future. You can do stuff like this. Sky's the limit, guys. He wasn't saying, stick within the box.
The other thing I remember about Joe with that is while we were at the school is when Von Baudet died from autoerotic asphyxiation. And Joe talked very movingly about having met Von and that he was an amazing cartoonist. I remember that because we didn't expect that. Like, we thought we were going to get the punitive moral lesson, like, see, what you undergrounders get. And Joe was just like, what a huge loss it was, and what an amazing cartoonist Von was. And it was really an awakening experience of like, wow, he's open to everything. Because Von Baudet was the cutting edge, transsexual, underground,
real out there,
wild cartoonist. And Joe was completely with that. We've got time for a couple of questions and then we'll wrap it up because I'm seeing clocks being checked back there. So, okay. Two or three questions if folks have them. Yes, Tim.
Yeah, I was wondering, because I've noticed that there's sort of a common denominator of Joe's style in all your Rick's and I see that sort of creates a continuity in the art from issue to issue, even if the same artist is working on the same issue sequentially. So I was wondering to what degree you were encouraged to incorporate elements of his art into your own work, and to what extent, or even how you went about discovering.
Just osmosis.
I think part of it was osmosis. Yeah, I think a lot of it was osmosis. I see it at the center. I teach at the Center for Cartoon Studies now, and the aesthetic is completely different. I mean, this is the Fantagraphics aesthetic now rules the current generation of comics. And I see how James Sturm, who co-founded the school, and Jason Lutz, the creator of Berlin, he's one of our instructors at the school. I'm seeing their influence on a portion of our students the same way that Joe's and Dick Giordano, we absorbed by osmosis a lot of those approaches to telling stories and breaking down pages, like the example Dave gave of, Rick Estrada showing us not only the right way, first he shows us the wrong way, and you don't forget those lessons, and it becomes part of who you are. I think another aspect of it, and you guys can address this, is I think we were also all trained in our discipline to, when you talk about maintaining a continuity, that part of your job was to make sure your work fit into the flow of what came before, and you didn't know what was coming after, and it wasn't like play along to get along. It was still make your mark, but be aware of, what came before you, because that was really kind of hammered
There are
into.
a couple of key things, though, that Joe brought out in his teaching. And one was to go for the emotional hit
Yeah.
in your drawings. That's one of the things that comes across in comics especially. The other thing he used to say was that contrast is your greatest tool. try to build your contrasts into your story, all variations that word can mean.
Yeah, narrative as well as visual
Yeah.
contrast, and
And I think-
that was really a part of the philosophy.
Yeah, I think we all absorbed that and brought that into our art. I don't think any of us has got the Kubert style like Andy and
Yeah, and Joe's sons really have the style. And I also think it was, we were still part of a generational continuity that worked with the comic page as a page, and I don't think that exists anymore.
Well, the other.
Comics have changed so much that,
Steve, the other thing too is where Joe came from. What got him started was the Prince Valiant, Hal Foster, Prince
Yeah.
Valiant, Alex Raymond, Flash Gordon, Bill
Yeah.
Kniffs,
Yeah.
you know, Terry and the Pirates. You know, maybe more so than anybody else, me and Tom are into that era of classical, like, you know, cartooning
Right.
or whatever you want to call it. But, you know, I never really understood how much that meant to guys like Joe, you know, what those, you know, the big three.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Foster, Raymond, and Kniff meant to them.
Sure.
Until I took, when you mentioned I had those pages, I was buying Sunday pages from a guy named Rich Halegua at the Creation Cons back in
yeah,
those
he was a
days.
Cincinnati-based dealer, wasn't he?
I don't remember.
Rachel
but-
Lakeland? I think,
He
Ohio,
moved
yeah.
to Texas since then, but yeah.
Yeah, he was, because
Okay,
I would
well-
see him here at the shows in the Ohio area.
Yeah, so I was buying these pages off of him, and then one night I took a pile of these pages into Joe, and I said, hey, Joe, check these out, you know, and he took a look at them, and he spread them out on that big table, you know, and he was like, these really take me back, you know. And
Was I there? I remember pouring over Raymond pages Sundays.
You might have been, but I remember, you know, he pulled those out, and he looked over them, and he was like
Yeah.
really into it, and he was just like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is the stuff that, you know, I remember from
Yeah, when he was a kid looking on.
And then he went over to one of those drawers and he pulled out this big thick stack of, that were rubber banded together, of old Foster dailies
Oh,
that
yeah.
he had gotten from Carmine Infantino.
Yeah, when Carmine got rid of his-
Fired, he was cleaning out his desk and he pulled those out and gave them to Joe.
Yep.
And so we were looking through those, and that's when I realized that Joe had cribbed a lot of that stuff for his
Sure.
first
Tarzans.
couple of Tarzans, yeah. And
Right.
I said that. I said, oh, this looks like exactly what you did, you know, in Tarzan. He goes, it is exactly what I did. I couldn't think of a better way to do it, so that I did that, you know. And it clicked
which was-
with me that, you know,
right.
he wasn't about just doing stuff for the sake of doing something different or whatever. He just wanted to get the story right.
Yeah, exactly.
It had to fit the story as
Yeah.
best it could. And then the other thing is, you know, Harry was a part of that generation too. I took those pages up to Harry, and I really thought twice about showing them to him because I thought, oh, he's gonna let me have it about wasting my money on stuff, you know, or something. And so I took them up anyway, and I showed them to Harry, and he looked at them, and he was like, these are really good pages, you know, these are great stuff. And you should buy more of these. You can learn a lot from this stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, that's when I really got the sense of, you know,
Right.
these guys like were revered.
Yeah.
And
We
which is
were,
funny,
we were absorbing that.
they're not the fanboy personalities at all, but yet when you bring out the Foster and the Raymond, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
they go back to when they were kids
But
reading.
that also constitutes a you know, this baseline of sorts.
Yeah.
Or the style that
Yes.
proceeds from that generation all
That's
the way up
right.
to ours, you know.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly. I think we're gonna have to call it because I'm seeing the next panel ready to come on. So thanks, everybody. I hope this
Thanks,
was
everybody.
enjoyable, and thanks to my classmates.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody here in Cincinnati. This has been a big thrill to have you here in town, so
Yeah.
glad to see you here.
Get us back here, Greg. Thanks, everybody.